Hello, my friends. It's time again for Spiritism, a closer look right here on Kardec Radio. So welcome everyone once again to our weekly program, Spiritism, a closer look, evolution. That's the topic we have been discussing. And this is our program number 8. Yeah, we spoke a lot of, we have been discussing a lot of different things, a lot of issues. And as I said in the very beginning of our meetings here, virtual meetings, evolution is such a huge topic that it requires, a long time for us to discuss everything. And we are just taking our time. We're just going a little bit at a time. And with your participation, your cooperation, it's good learning for all of us. So thank you very much once again for being with us here. And we're going to start, as always, with the answer to the question of this past week, our spirit trivia. So here's the question again. The question was, which of these life origin theories better align with Spiritism? We're going to discuss this a little bit longer. So it makes sense for you why we are discussing this. It might seem to you that, oh, well, why do I need to get into this thing? Well, let's see if I can make it more important for you. Like one day became really important for me as a Spiritist, not as a science man or anything like this, as a Spiritist. So let's go back to the question. Which of these life origin theories better align with Spiritism? And the first option is the Oparin-Haldane theory, which is a mix of biogenesis and abiogenesis. And we discussed this last time. Biogenesis means life can only come from life. Abiogenesis means life could come from inert matter. So that's the theory of Oparin. And that is the right answer. For those of you who participated and, brought your answer, that's the right answer. Let's look at the other options really quick here because there's some interesting information for us to discuss. Living creators that would be option number 2 or B. Living creators can only come from living creators. Mutation is not possible. You see, mutation is not possible denies the fact that there is evolution. One species can, become another one. And that's not it. That's not Spiritism. That would be creationism. And we have somebody participating, Juliana. Hi, Juliana. Thanks for participating. Here is another option, C. Living creatures, such as dogs and monkeys, arise from non-living matter. No, this is very clear in the Spiritist Codification. The abiogenesis, which is the point where living organisms come from inert matter, requires something called the vital principle. We discussed that at length in the past 2 or 3 meetings. And that only applies for the very primitive forms of life. Monkeys and dogs are not primitive forms of life. Though, that would only apply to unicellular organisms. Here's another option, D. Life as we know was brought to Earth from other planets, which is also known as cosmogony. That's not what Spiritism says. That's not what we believe. That's not in the codification. So if you participated with us and you had your cast your answer to A, that's all right, you got it right. Now, I want to bring something else on top of the answer, on top of this question here, which, like I just said, for me became an important thing when I connected the dots. So we have this Alexander Oparin, that's the creator of the theory, Oparin-Haldane theory. This happens in 1922 when, he was a Soviet biochemist, very famous within the Soviet Union, very famous Soviet biochemist. And he was really, from his early days in life, he was really interested in the origin of life. So he went after it, trying to get the answers for it. And he was able to produce his theory of pairing. And one of the things that he says in his theory, in his book, pay attention to this. These are his words, not mine. No, there is no fundamental difference between a living organism and lifeless matter. No fundamental difference between a living organism, life, and lifeless matter. If you go to the Genesis by Allan Kardec, you're going to have the same thing. And he didn't know anything about Allan Kardec. He'd never read Allan Kardec, never heard of Spiritism, but look how things are, the dots are starting to connect. That's an interesting point. And we also mentioned that his theory was, it took some good years to be generally accepted. And then only 30 years after him, this other gentleman here, he was an American chemist, Stanley Miller, he was able to, using Oparin's theory, in which there were some conditions when the Earth was created, some temperature situation, some, there was a whole setup that made the thing happen and life on the planet started. So he took that theory from Oparin and took it literally. So he bought a house, transformed the house in a laboratory, and in that house, in that lab, he recreated, duplicated the exact conditions that Oparin said would have been on Earth at the time life started. And he was able to create cells. These were cells that lived for seconds but died, but he was able to. So you see, that's only, that's 30 years later. So we are in 1953, when we got some scientific evidence for good that this thing was right. Okay, now if we go back in time, we had that all along. We had that written exactly as Stanley Miller was able to prove based on the theory of Oparin. It's been on the Genesis chapter 10 for years and years. And actually more than chapter 10, this, if you put it all together, there's a few places where the dots are connected. 1868, so way, way, way before, almost 80 years before we were able to go to a lab and make it happen. That gives a Spiritism a really bold, I would say, importance, at least for me. So very interesting to know all these things and to connect the dots like this. And we also have Lucas participating with us. Thank you, Lucas. So let's go to the next thing. Okay, so that was, I wanted to address this in more details because I thought it was an important thing in relation to the question of last week, our spirit trivia. Let's keep going. All of these studies, all of these things, they have to do with how life started on Earth, or the origin of life on Earth. We're just talking about one orb, or one heavenly body, if you will. Now, Earth is not alone. Earth is part of a solar system where we have more planets, all of them revolving around one other heavenly body, the Sun. Now, several solar systems revolve around something bigger, forming galaxies. Milky Way is the name of our galaxies. There are others. Our neighbor here is Andromeda, and it goes out there, it goes and it goes and it goes. Now, several galaxies revolve around something else, and it will form a local galactic group. Yeah, the names are becoming more complicated, right? They come from the astronomers. Several of these revolve around something else, creating a Virgo supercluster, which then creates a local superclusters. And it didn't stop. It keeps going. It goes on and on and on. It happens that our vocabulary stops. We don't have, our vocabulary ends, but not the universe. That's how big and how complete the universe is. So when you open up the Spirit's book, question number 1, what is God? That tells you the dimension of this thing. We cannot even grasp the idea. We can barely grasp the idea that there is more than one galaxy. For our brain is something you need to really concentrate and think hard and imagine that there's such a thing. So when you get all over to the superclusters and local superclusters, that's way above our capacity. And that's not even close to God. Okay, so anyhow, we were talking about life in one planet, how life started in one planet, but that's not the only thing. The Earth is part of a universe, an infinite universe, as we know. So, with this, we're going to bring some more information. If you look at the book of Genesis, there are several chapters addressing this. Chapter 5 is an important one. Chapter 9 is an important one. 5 and 6, 9, 10. These are important chapters in regards to explaining or fundamenting the idea of life on Earth, how it all started. And on this book of Genesis, at the end of the book, the very last chapter, there's a message from one spirit, discarnate spirit, called Franois Rocha. Rocha was a Frenchman, and he brings a very, very, very interesting message. Let's see who Rocha is before we actually bring his message, and let's see how the whole thing started. So first of all, who is Franois Rocha? He was a genius to begin with. At the age of 18, he became a secretary of the Paris Observatory. In those days, that was an amazing thing. It had to be a complete, above the average altogether. It had to be a genius to be there at such an early age of 18. Then he goes to the military, comes back from the war. At the age of 23, he becomes a member of the French Academy of Sciences. A French Academy of Sciences, to become a member, you had to be somebody really, really, really special, and you had to be able to have demonstrated your ability. So it would take years for you to be a member of the Academy. He was a member at 23, which is another amazing thing. Now, he was an astronomer, and he was also involved in the political French government. He occupied several different political, positions. But anyway, as an astronomer, he devoted his life not to look at the stars and understand the stars, because it all started with Galileo with the telescope. That's when we had at least equipment to be able, we were better equipped to understand all of that. So Franois Rocha, he said, the telescope is something absolutely magical. It's the genius of Galileo that brought it to us. But we need to make it better. In order to make a telescope better so we can see further and we can see more clear images, we need to go back to the study of optics. We need to study optics. That's the key to everything. So he devoted his life to studying optics with the purpose of helping astronomy in general, or all those interested in astronomy. So he made a tremendous success like nobody else. He was the inventor of the first polarization filter, which allows for the study of light. From then on, he was a total genius. Okay, so this guy discarnates, this genius discarnates, he's in the spirit world, and he will come with this message to us, published in the book of Genesis. One thing about the message that we are going to discuss, how did this message how did this message come into the hands of Allan Kardec? In Colombia, in Bogota, Colombia, in 1868, there was a very famous doctor, Dr. Ignacio Pereira. He was the founder of the Homeopathic Institute in Bogota, Colombia. And they had 3 consecutive years of very long summers, very long, much longer than the average summer. And he noticed that within those 3 years, a lot of plants and a lot of animals were sick. And the diseases were something he couldn't, not him himself, but the entire medical community couldn't figure out. Something was in there and they couldn't figure out. So he noticed that for those 3 years, this thing has been happening. So he suspects that it has something with the interaction between comets and the Earth, or meteors or something like that. So what he does is he consults his brother, who is discarnated. So he calls the spirit of his brother, and his brother says, it's not a comet, it's nothing like this. It is the planet Jupiter. Jupiter every 40 years approaches the Earth in such a way that disturbs things on Earth. And that's what you see every 40 years. So this guy, Dr. Ignacio Pereira in Colombia, he said, well, I need to study what happened 40 years ago, 80 years ago, 120 years ago. And he goes after the information. He seeks for explanation. He's a scientist. He's a medical doctor. And he found that indeed, every 40 years, the summers had been longer. The plants and animals had different things that were not usual. So he said, well, my brother, my deceased brother, right, the spirit of my brother, he's telling me something that, makes sense. But I want to know from the experts. That's his way of thinking, okay? I want to know from the experts. So he writes a letter to Allan Kardec and says, I'm going to tell you a story, which is a story I just told you. So he tells all of that to Allan Kardec and says, I need to be sure that my brother is telling me the right thing. So I needed to take this and consult or pass it along to the mentors of the Spiritist Society in Paris. Look at that, right? Unbelievable. So what does Allan Kardec does? He's a scientist. He's a man of black and white answers. He takes that right in and takes to the first meeting. And Franois Rocha, spirit, comes to address the question. Okay, so all this story, so you know why Franois Rocha came and what is behind the story. I think it's important for us to know. And the answer was published originally in the Spiritist Review of 1868, and later Allan Kardec republished in the book of Genesis in the last chapter. But originally it was published in the book, in the Spiritist Review of 1868, October, 1868. Okay, what does this message bring to us? Instead of reading the entire message, we're going to bring the key points of the message, the 5 key points of the message. So first, he's going to tell us that planetary systems and heavenly bodies influence one another. Okay, let's understand this. Heavenly bodies, what is this? Earth is one of them. The moon is another one. The sun is another one. Jupiter is another one. Capella is another one. These are one body systems. Now, one body, for example, there's interaction between them. Sun and Earth, Sun and Mars, all of them among the within the solar system. But not only one-to-one. Look at the message. Planetary systems influence other planetary systems. That means our solar system impacts somehow or influences the neighboring solar system. Our galaxy in Milky Way influences the neighboring galaxy. That's what it means. So, and it goes and it goes and it goes. We saw how big this thing is. We get to the clusters and super clusters. And again, vocabulary ends, but not the universe. So the key word here is influence. Well, what does he mean by influence? And he goes, these are his words, people. These influences are disturbances. There are disturbances that affect organic matter. What is organic matter? Living matter. Our bodies, the bodies of our animals, plants, and so on and so on and so on. So these influences affect organic matter, affect my body, your body, all the plants and animals, and all of that. Now, organic matter then is the key. And what does it say about this? He says there's gonna be alterations of physical states of living beings, and those can cause diseases in plants, animals, and humans. You see, all this starts with the influence of heavenly bodies and planetary systems. And now we're down already to the physical state of our living beings here on Earth. Okay? So it can cause diseases. So diseases is the key word here. And then he's going to tell us these diseases will drive human mind to find means to combat them, the diseases, and discover the laws of nature. Meaning, we're going to have to look for the answers. Just like Mr. Ignacio Pereira from Colombia, he was looking for answers. He was just going after the answers and trying to understand the whole thing. So Arago is telling us we are going to have to dig in until we discover the laws of nature. So the laws of nature here is the key on this phrase, and it will tell us once we know the laws of nature, that is the development of the spirit. As we know more about these laws of nature, the more advanced I become. Is it all making sense to you? How beautiful this whole thing is? It's a sequence of things that happen on an orderly fashion. It's not chance. There's something being orchestrated at a very high level, so all of this happens. So if we look at this particular screen and look at the last line and try to relate to the first, we could say that the development of the spirit, in part, is fed by the influences of planetary systems and heavenly bodies in relation to another. That's what the message is bringing to us. Franois Rocha addresses this message. The whole thing is written down on the mediumistic session that Allan Kardec was on. As soon as Franois Rocha finishes his talk, all right, the medium switches over and he says, there is somebody here that needs to add something. That somebody is Dr. Barry, which Dr. Barry was when incarnate, he was he used to attend the meetings at the Spiritist Society of Paris. So now he's discarnate. He comes to help us understand the message. So he's going to add more to what Franois Rocha told us. And he says these disturbances are nothing more than ways to make it all lead us into regeneration. We need that to be led towards regeneration. Otherwise, we would be just stuck. So very interesting what's happening here. Okay, so let's try to understand. Now that we know more, that was in 1868, and then of course Allan Kardec himself was able to grab more information. And then we have complementary and additional Spiritist literature throughout all these 160 and some years. So what do we know now? What can we put in perspective? First of all, planetary disturbances are going to have impact on both worlds. Remember, evolution in two worlds, right? On the physical world and on the spirit world. Let's start with the physical. So these influences will change the structure of matter. It will change the structure of matter lightly. Nothing is going to, our desks are not going to become liquid or nothing like this. But you will have an impact because that happens, okay? Remember, organic matter is still matter, okay? So changes in structure of matter, which will lead us to the next thing, which is this is going to cause diseases, not in all bodies, on those who are less healthy. Those bodies where the immune system is not very strong, these people will be susceptible to these changes. They will feel more of it. Consequently, those who have a more refined perispirit, those are going to be okay, if you will. And we also have Yolanda participating. Thanks, Yolanda. So here we are. More refined paraspirits will have a better chance of, going through this process. Which brings us to the next thing. If we're going to have more refined paraspirits generating or producing new physical bodies, these bodies have to have a better genetic. The genetics have to be modified. Otherwise, if there's no modification, we would be stuck in here for centuries and centuries and thousands and thousands and millions of years. And we know that's not true, because if you look back in time, 160, 2,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, we had a different body. We were called the Neanderthal. And it's not the same as us. The brain is different, the structure is different, the bone structure is different. So, of course, there was somewhere in between there and now, which we're going to see this in a few weeks from now, there was a modification in genetics. So genetic will be modified to sustain, to be able to sustain itself when these planetary disturbances become more evident. Okay, then we have actually a question here. And the question is, isn't genetic changes a consequence of moral advancements? Yes, it is. Great question. I think it was Jennifer. Great question. So we're going to talk about this in 10 seconds. Just give me 10 seconds, okay? So with these genetic modifications, we have kind of, if you go back using Darwin words, kind of a, in quotes, natural selection of spirits. There's going to be some screening. Some of them will be able to continue here, some will not. They have to go to a different type of environment in terms of physical world. Now, there's also implications on the spirit world. What kind of implications? Well, first of all, on the material side, we're going to have changes in the structure of matter, but actually these changes are in the fluid. Remember we spoke about the planetary fluid? The planetary fluid is going to change. So the matter, the physical matter within the fluid is going to change. So they align with each other. Changes in the fluidic composition of the planet incur in changes of the structure of matter. Once that happens, the fluidic composition changes, the Earth psychic atmosphere, also called psychosphere, will change. The fluidic composition changes, so the psychosphere changes, which implies in spirits that are less advanced morally. You see, we're getting into moral to respond to Jennifer's question. Now, the spirits who are less advanced are going to have a hard time. You see, this is not for them. It's like more or less, sometimes you can go to a party and suddenly in the middle of a party, everything is okay and you're okay in the party. Somewhere in the middle you say, nah, this is kind of boring. I just want to go home. And you go home. Nobody kicked you out. You just didn't feel that the atmosphere was for you. So you voluntarily left. It wasn't good enough for you. This is what's going to happen here. Less advanced spirits are just going to throw in the towel and say, that's not for me. I'm going somewhere else. Meaning they have to have better moral standards to stay. And that, I think, gets to where Jennifer is placing the question. And the question, I think it was, if genetic modifications do align somehow with the moral standards or moral advancement, yes, absolutely. The only difference is genetics is in the physical body, morality is in the spiritual body. It's at the spirit level. But yes, absolutely. Morality is going to have to change for those spirits that will sustain living here on earth. Those who cannot improve their moral standards, they cannot advance morally, they will have to look for another place to live. There are several dwellings in my Father's house, right? And finally, once this psychosphere is adjusted or changed, once the moral advancement requires different types of spirits, we're going to see transmigration of spirits, meaning spirits that are here and they don't like to party anymore, they're going to go somewhere else. And more advanced spirits that right now have a hard time coming into the earth because of the atmosphere is not at the level that they are, it's too low for them, they will be able to live on Earth, come here, and help us make it a better planet, spiritually speaking. So yes, everything is integrated. Everything is connecting. Though what you see here is something that is detailed, and I just made it in a graphic form to make it maybe a little easier to understand, hopefully. But if you go back to the Franois Rocha message, you can get it from the last chapter in the Genesis book. So go there. This is exactly what he's saying, and it's we have seen that before. Transmigration of spirits. We have the exiles of Capella, which we're going to touch briefly in 2 or 3 weeks. Not briefly, actually. We're going to speak a little bit about it. Anyhow, let's go to the next thing here. Let's start to wrap up today's meetings. It's been a lot of information, a lot of things. We can go deeper into each one of them. So I encourage you to participate with us. If you have any comments, any questions, just go to Kardec Radio, and we have a form so you can put your questions in there, your comments. All right, so coming back to the planet Earth, there is a very interesting drawing, which is what you see here on this screen. This drawing comes from a book. It's called City in the Greater World, basically, in the spirit world. And this came because of a medium that she used to dream and see things every night, the same thing, recurring dream. At a certain point, she said, I don't want to do this anymore. It's not that it's bad, not at all, but I can't, every night is the same thing. So she kind of gets a piece of paper and starts to draw, the way she could. She was not a drawer, a professional, not even a sketch she could do, right? But she could, with time, she was perfecting because the dreams were there every night. So he takes this and takes to Brazilian medium Chico Xavier, and he looks at it and say, well, they were a sequence of 12 images, and he looks at these 12 images and he says, this is what we call Nosso Lar. This is the colony, Nosso Lar. So this is one of the 12 drawings. This is what it means. It means the 12 spiritual layers of the planet, spiritual. Let's look at this. If you look at the picture, in the very center, you see the Earth. You can see the Americas, North America, South America, okay? In the very center here, I'm circulating in red. So inside the Earth, if you were able to dive into the planet, okay, all the way inside, it's what science calls inner core, the very center of the Earth. Right after that, around the inner core, we have the outer core, then the lower mantle. This is all below the surface, okay? Lower mantle, and finally upper mantle. These 4 layers are underneath the crust. These layers, in terms of spiritual dwellings, that's where the dark zones are. The lowest possible advanced spirits in the planet, that's where they go to when they discarnate. Dark zones, lower zones sometimes. It's called lower zones, okay? All right, coming up. Now we get to the crust. That's where we are. Who is living in the crust? Incarnate spirits. The crust is not a house, is not housing discarnate spirits. The crust is housing incarnate spirits. Okay, we are here regardless if we came from the dark zones and incarnated, we came from the very top zones that we're going to get to. It doesn't matter. If we are incarnate, we are on the crust. The crust is a house for incarnate spirits. When we die, we are no longer in the crust. Okay, let's continue. So hopefully it's going to be easy to explain to you. Above that, we have what we call the umbral. This word umbral, we are kind of lucky enough because the word umbral is not in the codification, was created through additional Spiritist literature brought from Brazilian mediums, especially Chico Xavier, and the spirits who dictated the messages to him used the word umbral to mean exactly the same thing in English. We have that word in English. We are lucky that we don't have to guess the best translation, anything like this. Umbral. Umbral is like a passage. Like you have the door and you have the frame for the door. That's the umbral. Okay. All right. So the above the umbral, we have the art, culture, and science. Then we have universal fraternal love. Then we have directives of the planet. And then above that, we have more stuff, which is called stellar dome. But you see, stellar dome is already outside the planetary fluid. Remember, we spoke about this. The planetary fluid, stellar dome is already above that. Okay, so within the planetary fluid, we go from top, directives of the planet, to the bottom, inner core. Again, the crust houses incarnate spirits. All right, let's take a better look at this umbral. Umbral is divided in Spiritist literature in three parts. It is just divided because it's easier for us to understand, that's all. Okay, it's just to make it easier to explain things. So this umbral is divided in lower umbral, mid umbral, and upper umbral. Upper umbral is also called umbral, simply, sometimes. Upper umbral is where spiritual colony Nosolar is located. Again, Nosolar is not a house for incarnate spirits. Incarnate spirits live on the crust. Nosolar houses discarnate spirits. There has to be very clear. So what do we have on the crust? Do we have spirits that came from the upper umbral? Yes. When they incarnate, yes. Do we have spirits from directives of the planet? Yes, 2,000 years ago we had one of them. Okay, he incarnated right here, walking on the surface of the planet, walking on the crust. Do we have spirits from outer core? Yes, we do. So we have all types. We all live here on the crust as incarnates. With discarnate, the thing changes altogether. Let's see what happens when we discarnate. Okay, so I'm going to leave these layers here so we can relate to them. Let's go by analogy. Take a recipient with water. Okay, like you see here, I'm trying to make a visual for you. So here's a recipient with water. If you take a styrofoam little ball and just drop it, this ball is never going to make all the way down to the bottom. It's going to stay on the surface. And this is common sense. We can go right now and do an experiment right here in your home. You can do this, okay? If we take a ball now made of iron or plum, very heavy, and we just we just drop it, it's going to go to the bottom of the recipient. There's no way this thing is going to stay on the surface. So it's depending on the material, it's going to be on a different level, right? So we're taking the two extremes: styrofoam, which is going to stay afloat on the surface, and iron, which is going to go all the way down. Iron or plum or anything heavy, you're going to go all the way down. Now here's the trick. Suppose you pick up with your hand the styrofoam ball. You pick up, okay, styrofoam ball with your hand, and you put your hand halfway down the water level, just halfway down, and you're holding the styrofoam ball. How long is the styrofoam ball going to stay in there? Answer: for as long as I hold it. If I do the same thing to the iron ball, the same thing happens. If I physically pick up the iron ball, put it in my hands, and I put my hand halfway down the water level, the iron ball is not going to go to the bottom. It's going to stay in my hand until when? Until I let it go. Okay, that's common sense. That's an analogy. Okay, what is the analogy? This is what happened with the perispirit. Why, coming back here, why do styrofoam and iron behave differently? Because they are different structures. Physics puts something called, they study this based on something called specific weight. The specific weight on iron is very high, so it goes down, it's very heavy. The specific weight on styrofoam is very low, so it stays up. The same happens to the perispirit. The perispirit is being held, it's being held by something physical called physical body. Physical body is right there, halfway down in the water level, if you will, if you understand the analogy. What happens when we die? When we die, the physical body let go. So now the perispirit is going to go to the level that it belongs to naturally. There's nothing holding it somewhere. There's nothing more, nothing else holding that body onto the crust level. So when we die, any of us, when we die, our perispirit goes to one of these 12 layers, to the one that is in line with its specific weight. If the perispirit is too heavy, this thing is going to go down. You're going to discarnate and you're going to go under the crust to one of the dark zones. If the perispirit is somewhere, somewhere a little bit more refined, it's going to go up. It could be up in the umbral, one of the 3 layers of the umbral. If it's really a light perispirit, meaning somebody really more advanced than the average, it's going to go up to arts and culture. It's going to go to universal fraternal love. Jesus didn't go to any of these. He went to directives of the planets. Now, here's an interesting thing. For you to leave the crust, okay, and go to the directive of the planets, you have to go through the umbral. It doesn't mean that you go to the umbral, but you have to pass through, right? So a lot of us, we are fascinated with the book No Solar, and we say, well, when I die, I want to go to No Solar. Okay, that's fine, but as long as you understand all of this, right? You don't choose at the time of death. It's already been chosen by each one of us, and it's based on our spiritual history. It's the weight that our perispirit carries that takes me here or there. It's that weight with accumulated vices and virtues. It's a balance of vices and virtues. More virtues, good chance to go up. More vices, not so much. Okay? So the perispirit, to each one of us, the perispirit is the element which is going to define where we go. It's not by choice 5 minutes before death. Just doesn't happen that way. So, you see, this is serious. This is really serious. So we're going to wrap up today's thought, okay, with the idea that all these influences, all these disturbances caused by planetary influences, they will have an impact on our systems in both worlds, spirit world and material world. And these influences have to be well understood. Hopefully I was able to contribute a little bit so we can all understand. Once we understand this, we can do something. If we don't do anything, if we keep, hitting the same wall, if the writing on the wall is there and we just accept that, we're not going to be able to go up. Our perispirit is going to continue carrying the same weight. and we are not going to get any better. To a point where these planetary influences can create an atmosphere that now makes my perispirit incompatible with it, and I have to leave. I have to throw in the towel and go somewhere else, but that somewhere else is not better than here. It's worse. Okay, guys, that's what I wanted to bring today. Once again, I invite you to participate with us on our Spirit Trivia. Okay, don't forget, Spirit Trivia, you can just go to evolution.spirittrivia.com, cast your answer. I already published a question while I was talking to you. I published a new question, so you can participate. Once again, to make it very clear, I always like to say that we do not collect anything at all. It's totally 100% anonymous. We do not collect email addresses, names. You don't even have a space to put your name, your email address. We don't collect IP addresses, nothing like this. Cookies, nothing like this. Okay? So participate with us. Go to evolution.spirittrivia.com. Cast your answer for today's question, and we'll come back here next week to discuss the question. And of course, much, 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 much more. Thank you all for your participation today, and have a great, great, great night. Thank you so much.